Today I want to talk about departure procedures, but in particular not about SIDs or standard instrument departures. I assume everyone who flies IFR and X-plane is familiar with standard instrument departures, and if you get a clearance that you are cleared Rudy 6 departure climb via the SID, then you know how to interpret this diagram and how to punch the SID into your FMC or into the G1000 or into the 430 or whatever equipment you have on the plane you're flying, and you know how to fly the path, comply with the climb restrictions, and make the controller happy and fly the SID safely. The topic I want to talk about today are obstacle departure procedures. So what do you do when you are at an airport that does not have any SIDs? And you want to depart IFR from there, the weather condition is IMC, you have low visibility or low ceilings while you take off, and you need to resume your navigation somewhere, but there's no SID to take you from the runway to your flight plan, the airway you want to intercept or whatever. So in a perfect world, where everything is at sea level and the world is perfectly flat, this couldn't be easier. Normally, the departure is defined by an obstacle clearance surface, OCS, with a 40:1 slope. So we assume that you cross the departure end of the runway at 35 feet or higher, and from there out there's a 40:1 slope. So for every 40 nautical miles in lateral distance, 1 nautical mile in height difference, and this defined surface is not penetrated by any objects, no mountains, no antennas, no wind turbines, whatever. And a plane taking off from the runway crosses the departure end 35 feet or above, and then climbs at least 200 feet per nautical mile. Climb gradient, we'll get into what this is in a climb rate later. And it just climbs out to 400 feet, and at 400 feet it turns wherever it's going. So, easy as that. Unfortunately, in real life, there are obstacles, there are mountains, and not everything is as straightforward as this simple example. Take, for example, Colorado. Let's assume we want to depart from Durango, Colorado, and go down here to the Four Corners Regional Airport. We want to do it IFR, and Durango has no SIDs, so how do we get out of here? And I would like to draw your attention to the quadrangle altitude here, which is 16.5. It's not really feasible for a 172 to take off in Durango, Colorado, climb up to 16,500 feet while doing what? Circling over the airport? Yeah, and then at the complying with the OROCA, with the off-route obstacle clearance altitude, then join some airway and go down here. So how do we solve this if we don't have a standard instrument departure? Well, the answer is we look up, we look up the instrument procedures for the airport, and as you can see here, there's approaches but no SIDs. But we find a note that says special takeoff minimums and departure procedures apply. And the departure procedures that talks about, that's not a SID, it talks about an obstacle departure procedure. So if we click this, we end up in a PDF like that. This is the chart supplement. We search for Durango because this PDF contains all airports in Colorado. So we find the airport we are departing from, and we find this, the takeoff minimums and the obstacle departure procedures. The obstacle notes down here, this lists everything that pokes into this 40:1 slope. So everything that pokes into this clearance surface here with the 40:1 slope, everything like mountain or tree or antenna or whatever that pokes through here is listed. Is listed here in the takeoff obstacle notes. And we have the departure procedure that tells us how to fly to stay on an obstacle clear path and avoid those obstacles. And it says here, departing runway 3, we do a climbing right turn to 9,000 feet heading 160, and then we join the radial 125 of the Durango VOR DME to the Reeser intersection. Or for climb in visual conditions has other instructions, but we are interested in flying at IMC. And then we want to take a look here at the takeoff minimums, where it says for runway 3, the standard takeoff minimums apply, I'll get into that later, with a minimum climb gradient of 215 feet per nautical mile to 7,600. So remember, the default, if nothing else is listed, is 200 feet per nautical mile. So we need to be a little bit better than that. So how does 200 feet per nautical, or 215 feet in our case per nautical mile, translate into our climb rate? Well, we have this very helpful climb and descent table here where we can look this up. And you will find at the top here that a 2 degrees gradient corresponds to 210 feet per nautical mile. And then we look up in the column for the ground speed that we are flying. And in the cell here, it tells us the vertical speed, feet per minute, that we need to achieve to get the climb gradient. So with our 172, we're going to be climbing out at like, what, 75 knots maybe. So we would be somewhere in here. I guess to play it safe, call it 300 feet per minute. 300 feet per minute does not sound like a very exciting climb rate, but keep in mind we take off from an airport that is already over 6,000 feet above sea level. Add to that when the plane is fully loaded, and maybe it's a warmer than standard day, so it adds to the density altitude. And you can see why you would want to make sure that you can make those 300 feet per minute to get the climb gradient that we need. So it tells us here, when we can get this minimum climb gradient, then standard takeoff minima apply, and that is 1 mile of visibility for a 1 or 2 engine aircraft, or half a mile visibility for a 3 or 4 engine aircraft. And actually for Part 91 operations, so if you're just flying your private 172 for your own pleasure, and you're not a commercial operation, then even those rules don't apply, and you could theoretically take off with 0 visibility and 0 ceiling, seeing nothing at all. It's completely stupid, but it would be legal. Alright, and as we can see here, suppose we could not make this 215 feet per nautical mile to 7,600, then higher minimums would apply. We would need a ceiling of 1,700 feet and 3 miles visibility for a climb out in visual conditions, so we could visually avoid all the obstacles. Alright, but since we decided we can make the 215 feet per nautical mile, all we need is a mile visibility, and then we fly the obstacle departure procedure as it said here textually. So remember, this is not a SID, so it's not going to be in the FMC database, it's not going to be charted. We have to fly the text. And what I do in real life, I use 4Flight, and 4Flight has a scratch function where you can just paint yourself or paint on your plate something. So what I would do in 4Flight, and I can do basically the same in Microsoft Edge here, when departing runway 3, I make a right turn to 160, and then I join this 125 radial here. So I need to keep in mind that this is heading 160. I want to go up to 9,000 feet. Yeah, pen would make this easier. There you go. And then I join this 125 radial, and it called for the Reeser intersection, which is at 19 DME. So I want to be on the 125 radial and fly out to 19 DME, and then I'm at this intersection, and look at that. I can from here follow the Victor 210 airway down here to the Rattlesnake VOR, and all I need for that is 9,000 feet and not 16.5. So that sounds doable. Alright, so this is how you find your obstacle departure procedure. Let's fly it and explain. So we are here on runway 3. We have a fully loaded 172. As you can see, the tanks are full, and the airport has a field elevation of 6,700 feet, so we got quite the density altitude going. Complete with a fully loaded plane, we will really be struggling somewhat to climb. What I want to do in preparation for our departure, as you can see here, I've set the flight plan just to take us to the Rattlesnake VOR, and I'm just going to pretty much ignore it because, as you remember, the obstacle departure procedure cannot be loaded into the GPS. The GPS only loads SIDs, and there are no SIDs here. So instead, what I want to do is I want to keep in mind that I need to make a right turn after takeoff to heading 160. I'll dial that in right here. And then I want to join the radial 125 of the Durango VOR. So I'll put in my 125 radial here. And since I don't have a DME, I'm going to substitute the GPS distance here to the Durango VOR as the DME distance. And I want to fly out to 19 DME. As per the obstacle departure procedure. Alright, let's get going. Flaps 10 for the short field takeoff procedure, and observe that I've pulled out the mixture for best power, which is absolutely necessary at a 6,700 feet airport, that you have best power mixture set. So let's get going. Full power. You can see how much we struggle. Maximum gross weight, 6,700 feet. This is really all the power we got. 55, rotate. There we go. Not kidding, 300 feet per minute. Alright, flaps up, and climbing, right turn to heading 160, here we go. So for best climb airspeed, I want to be at about 70 knots. And you will see that when I'm on heading 160, the radial will start moving in pretty quickly. So here we are, heading 160. Climbing with about 400 feet per minute now. As you can see, the radial is moving in, so heading 125 to track the radial now. We are very close to the VOR, so the needle is extremely sensitive. Yep, this is about where we want to be. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the easy way out and just click the autopilot on and nav mode so it can track the 125 radial for me. I'm not going to put it into any vertical mode. I'm not going to activate vertical speed. I'm going to keep flying the plane with the trim wheel because the rate-based autopilot is not going to pay attention to my airspeed, and if it holds a vertical speed, it'll just stall the plane if it needs to. So yeah, better to keep the pitch axis off for a minute and just keep flying the plane with the trim wheel. And as you can see here, I've trimmed for about 70 knots. I'm getting my 400 feet per minute. Not very impressive climb rate, but hey, it's all we got. Alright, we are now established on the 125 radial outbound. Yeah, 125, needle is nice and centered. And now all we got to do is climb up to 9,000 feet and track the radial all the way out to 19 miles, and then we should be at the Reeser intersection. And yeah, I want to draw your attention to the fact that my magenta line is here and I don't care. So yeah, the FMC or the GPS is completely out of the picture right now. It has no idea what the ODP is. I'm flying that by the textual description, and I could not care less where my magenta line is. Looks like we are about to break out of the clouds here. Nice. And I'm going to tweak the mixture a little bit to make sure we still have best power. So the EGT is coming up and it peaks about here. See, it's not going to get any higher, so I put my red marker here, bring the mixture back up on the ridge side and put it about 50 degrees ridge of my red marker. And whoops, that was just the mouse over the wrong manipulator. Yeah, and this gives me the maximum power. So 1,000 feet to go. We are at 8,000 now, and we're making a very impressive 400 feet per minute climb still. So this is still going to take a while coming up to 9,000. Alright, what I'm going to do here is just I'm going to speed this up a little bit and use the ground speed compression here, get us closer to the DME where we want to be, closer to our altitude where we want to be. And here at 9,000 I'm just going to level off. And then I guess it's a good time to get the vertical axis of the autopilot going and just click it into altitude hold mode now. Yep, and this is as much power as we're going to get. So I'd be surprised if I even get to see 100 indicated. So 2,500. Okay, I'm going to use a little more time compression here. Whoops. So remember, 19 DME is the distance we're looking for. 16, 17. So about a mile in front of us is going to be the Reeser intersection. Haha, what do you know? So see, we found it without using the GPS, without using an FMC, and now I can resume my magenta line. Now I want to go to the rattlesnake VOR. Now I make the magenta line appear here and click the autopilot into GPS steering, and now we can follow the Victor. What was it? The Victor 210 airway down to the rattlesnake VOR. And if we bring up the map view here, you can see that's exactly how the ODP worked. Climbing right turn 160, then join the 125 radial, keep flying the radial to 19 point DME, which is this point, and here we are joining the Victor 210 airway, and all we need to have here is 9,000 feet and not 16,500. And from here on we're back to GPS FMC navigation. Now we can go back to the magenta line, but keep in mind we completely ignored the GPS or the FMC for the obstacle departure procedure. So this is how you fly a textual obstacle departure procedures. There are a few that are actually charted. This is an example here, North Las Vegas. They have the Boulder City 1 departure, and it looks like a SID, but you notice it says up here obstacle in parentheses. So that means it's not a SID, it's an obstacle departure procedure, but it is charted like a SID, and I guess for all practical purposes you can treat it as a SID, as this is actually in the Jeppesen database. So even though it's an obstacle departure procedure, you can just load it into the FMC and fly it. Alright, I want to take one final look at another airport with obstacle departure procedures, and that would be Asheville, North Carolina. Here, as you can see, we do have alternate takeoff minimums and departure procedures, and if we pull up the chart supplement here, it'll tell us that the departure procedure is going to be climb for runway 17, climb on 167. That is runway heading to 4,600 before proceeding on course. And if we're going the other way into even higher terrain, it tells us to stay on heading 347 to 5,700 before proceeding on course. So if we were to do the Florida thing here and just assume this is an impenetrable surface, we climb with 200 feet per nautical mile gradient, 400 feet, and then we make a right turn or a left turn to wherever we want to go, for example Sugarloaf Mountain View R, we would crash right into the mountains. So this is why, even with no SID, there's still procedures to follow. In this case, you need to climb to 4,600 or even 5,700 before you can do any turns. Otherwise, you will end up on the slope of a mountain. And I would like to draw your attention here again to the takeoff minimums. We need an even higher climb gradient here, 250 feet per nautical mile. In our climb gradient table, we would now go into the second row here, and depending on our ground speed, if we were flying something a little faster, maybe a Mooney, we would need a full 400 feet per minute climb rate out of there, all the way up to 4,700 feet. And yeah, on a hot day or with a fully loaded plane, you really need to calculate this. You really need to look into your POH, pull your climb rates that you can get with a density, altitude, temperature, and loadout, and then decide whether what we're doing here is safe. And if we decide it is not, and we cannot do this climb gradient, then we must climb in visual conditions, and we need a 3,600 foot ceiling, 3 miles of visibility. And I picked Asheville because it has another way for the departure procedures. It has VCOA. You don't find that at many airports. VCOA means a visual climb over the airport. So basically what you do is you just keep circling over the airport in a what they call an obstacle-free cylinder, which has, as far as I remember, 2 nautical mile radius around the airport reference point. So the visual climb over the airport would be, you would just keep circling, flying in a 2 mile circle around the airport, climb up to 5,600 feet before you leave this 2 nautical mile cylinder and go off somewhere else. And as they say here, you don't do that at night. So both obstacle departure procedures and of course VCOA as well is not going to be assigned by ATC to you. It is something that you must decide to do, and tell ATC about it, that they should expect you via the obstacle departure procedure. They are not even required procedures, so if you are just a Part 91 operator climbing out of Durango or out of Asheville, there's no regulation that says you need to follow the obstacle departure procedure, but for safety reasons, it's a good idea to do it, because people have been thinking about the obstacle clearance surface and how to get out of this airport without hitting anything, and they've written it down for you, so you better make sure that you do exactly that. And well, to all the FMC flyers in X-Plane, whenever you have an airport that has no SID, look up the textual representation, ignore the FMC, ignore the magenta line while you're doing it, just do your procedure as it is written down, and then once you are at the minimum altitude or wherever the ODP ends, then is the time to pull up the FMC, press direct intercept, go to the first waypoint in your flight plan, and only then will you be following the magenta line. And now to wrap this up, I have been showing you the FAA plates in the FAA chart supplement, where to find it there. If you use Jeppesen charts, for example, because you have a NaviGraph chart subscription, you get your Jeppesen charts from NaviGraph, or you have another source, then the information you're looking for is on the 10-9 plate. That is the airport diagram. So you would be looking at the airport diagram here, and then in the bottom left corner it has all the information, the takeoff minima, the required visibilities for 1 or 2 engines and 3 or 4 engines, so the required ceilings or visibilities or RVRs, and the required minimum climb gradients and everything. Instead of a text, it has this block here where you go down the runway, the climb gradient, whatever you have, then you look up your minimum, and it has the textual description of what to do, where to turn, where to climb down here. So you in the FAA, you look it up in the chart supplement, and with Jeppesen, you look it up on the airport diagram. And now that you know where to find obstacle departure procedures, I hope you will be a safer instrument pilot in X-Plane.